On April 26, 1956, a converted oil tanker left Newark, New Jersey for Houston, Texas. Loading traditional cargo cost $5.83 per ton. Loading this vessel cost a mere 15.8 cents per ton. Welcome to the Sovereign Archive. I am the auditor. You have been taught that the modern global economy was built by microchips, air travel, and free trade treaties. That is a convenient myth. What nobody knew at the time was that a forgotten trucker had just dismantled the world economic order. A simple corrugated steel box unleashed the greatest financial shift in human history. History is not written by politicians or ideology. It is written by balance sheets, debt leverage, and logistics power. To understand the magnitude of this transformation, we must examine the absolute chaos of mid-century maritime trade. Before the mid-1950s, international shipping operated under an ancient, labor-intensive method known as breakbulk cargo. Merchant ships were essentially floating warehouses packed by hand. 1,000-pound crates, sacks of coffee beans, barrels of rum, and loose machinery arrived at ports on wooden flatbeds. Hundreds of dockworkers, known as longshoremen, squeezed into dark cargo holds. They pulled, lifted, and stacked every individual item using hand hooks, rope slings, and wooden pallets. The economic friction was staggering. A standard cargo ship spent over 60% of its operational lifetime tied to a wooden pier, completely motionless. Floating capital sat dead in the water for weeks at a time. Shipowners burned millions of dollars paying daily port fees, crew wages, and dock rentals while no freight moved across oceans. Ships earned revenue only while moving between ports. Sitting idle at a dock was a financial hemorrhage. The human element brought immense inefficiency and widespread systemic theft. Cargo damage rates were catastrophic. Burlap sacks ripped open under heavy iron hooks. Glass bottles shattered inside flimsy crates. Organized crime syndicates thoroughly controlled the waterfront docks from New York to Liverpool. Stevedores routinely looted high-value items, calling it an informal labor tax. Entire shipments of whiskey, textiles, and electronics vanished into shadow markets before reaching shore. Insurance premiums soared, adding another massive tax on international commerce. This operational nightmare created an invisible wall around national economies. High transport friction operated as an unintended, massive protective tariff. The cost of ocean freight swallowed up to 20% of the final price of any manufactured product. International trade was strictly limited to high-value luxury goods, raw bulk commodities, or neighboring nations. Factory owners in Ohio could not compete with manufacturers in London or Frankfurt. Shipping costs destroyed their margins before their goods even landed on foreign soil. Local markets remained isolated. National borders remained economically secure because moving physical goods across oceans was ruinously expensive. Central banks and industrial cartels accepted this friction as an unshakable law of nature. They assumed ocean transport would always remain slow, unpredictable, and expensive. The physical geometry of the port dictated global economics. Narrow urban streets could not handle massive truck convoys. Wooden piers lacked space for heavy machinery. Ships required long, specialized crews to navigate and balance manual loads. Every port was a complex bottleneck where speed went to die. Behind these physical obstacles sat a massive wall of regulatory bureaucracy. Customs officials inspected individual crates by hand. Cargo manifests were handwritten ledgers containing thousands of separate line items. A single ocean voyage required hundreds of signatures, permits, and stamped customs clearances. If a single document contained an error, cargo sat rotting on the dock for weeks. The financial return on capital invested in shipping was abysmal. Only protected state monopolies and entrenched maritime dynasties survived in this rigid, slow-moving ecosystem. The economic consequence was clear. Global manufacturing remained localized inside wealthy Western nations. Factories had to sit near their ultimate consumers. American consumers bought American products made by high-wage American union workers. British consumers bought British goods. Global supply chains did not exist because the transport overhead made cross-border component assembly a financial impossibility. The global economy was fragmented, slow, and expensive. It required a radical shock to shatter this equilibrium. The global monetary architecture after World War II was heavily shaped by the Bretton Woods system. Gold was pegged to $35 an ounce, and international trade was supposed to flourish under fixed exchange rates. Yet, physical commerce lagged far behind financial theory. Governments tried to stimulate trade through tariff reductions, but those policy changes hit a brick wall at the water's edge. Reducing a tariff by 5% meant nothing when port handling fees ate up 15% of the shipment value. National merchant fleets were heavily subsidized by taxpayers to maintain defense readiness. Governments viewed ocean liners and cargo freighters as auxiliary naval vessels rather than efficient wealth generators. This nationalized approach killed innovation. Maritime executives spent their energy lobbying governments for subsidies rather than redesigning their operational models. They believed the physical act of moving goods was fully optimized. Meanwhile, urban port cities were drowning in logistics congestion. The Manhattan waterfront was a nightmare of horse-drawn carts, diesel trucks, and decaying wooden piers. Trucks sat idling for 10 hours just to unload a single cargo bed. Drivers fought over parking spaces along crowded avenues. The economic loss in wasted fuel, delayed deliveries, and spoiled produce ran into hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Here's the thing most people don't realize. The global shipping industry was fundamentally insolvent without government lifelines. Think about that for a second. A system carrying 90% of world trade was running on financial life support. Pay attention to this next detail because it explains everything. The entire global trade architecture was held hostage by a single physical bottleneck: the time it took a human hand to lift a wooden box. The man who broke this bottleneck was not a glamorous maritime tycoon or a blue-blood banker. He was a ruthless, pragmatic truck driver from rural North Carolina named Malcolm McLean. In 1935, during the height of the Great Depression, McLean bought a second-hand pickup truck to haul dirt and agricultural produce. By the early 1950s, McLean focused on relentless operational efficiency. His business grew into one of the largest trucking fleets in the United States. McLean spent years watching his trucks sit idle at coastal ports. In 1937, he waited 9 hours at a Jersey City pier to deliver cotton bales bound for Istanbul. He watched longshoremen slowly load his truck payload onto a ship piece by piece. McLean realized the fundamental absurdity of the entire process. He asked himself why anyone was unloading trucks at all. Why not simply detach the trailer body, hoist it onto the ship, and haul it away at the destination port? Turning that simple idea into reality required breaking a maze of federal regulations, anti-monopoly laws, and corporate resistance. Under the Interstate Commerce Act, the Interstate Commerce Commission strictly forbade trucking companies from owning ocean shipping lines. Regulators wanted to prevent transport monopolies from fixing freight prices across domestic corridors. McLean realized he could not simply buy a fleet of ships through his existing trucking firm. He needed a brilliant financial maneuver: follow the money. In 1955, McLean made a massive, high-stakes financial gamble that shocked the transport industry. He sold his entire stake in McLean Trucking Company for $6 million in cash. He then took that liquidity and partnered with aggressive Wall Street financiers, including Walter E. Heller and Company and Chase Manhattan Bank. Together, they secured a massive leveraged loan facility. McLean used this capital to acquire a struggling, regulated shipping operator called the Pan-Atlantic Steamship Company. Because he no longer officially owned a trucking business, McLean bypassed the Interstate Commerce Commission regulations. He transformed Pan-Atlantic into a specialized entity designed for a totally untested logistics concept. McLean understood that success did not depend on buying pretty ships. It depended on designing a completely integrated, mechanical logistics system where truck chassis, crane hooks, and ship holds operated as a single, synchronized machine. To build this system, McLean hired a brilliant engineer named Keith Tantlinger. Tantlinger designed the structural blueprint that would redefine global trade. He created a light, corrugated steel box with reinforced corners capable of holding 20 tons of cargo. Crucially, Tantlinger invented the corner casting and the twist lock mechanism. This ingenious lock allowed heavy cranes to clamp onto the container securely. The crane could lift it 50 feet in the air and lock it onto a ship deck in seconds. McLean made a decision that surprised his financial partners and competitors alike. Instead of patenting Tantlinger's revolutionary twist lock design to secure a private monopoly, McLean chose to release the patents completely royalty-free to the entire industry. He understood a fundamental economic truth. A proprietary container design would create isolated, incompatible corporate networks. To achieve global scale, the entire world had to adopt the exact same locking mechanism, frame dimensions, and crane hook specs. On April 26, 1956, McLean was ready to unveil his experiment to a skeptical audience of maritime executives and military observers. At the port of Newark, New Jersey, a converted World War II T-2 oil tanker named the Ideal X stood ready at the dock. Large commercial cranes lifted 58 fully loaded metal containers onto special steel decks built over the ship's piping system. Each box was secured in less than 4 minutes. The Ideal X slipped out of Newark Harbor and set sail down the Atlantic coastline toward Houston, Texas. 5 days later, the ship docked in Texas. Giant cranes lifted the boxes off the deck and placed them directly onto waiting truck flatbeds within hours. The financial results were staggering, completely annihilating traditional shipping economics. Loading a standard breakbulk freighter cost $5.83 per ton in 1956 currency. Loading the Ideal X cost exactly 15.8 cents per ton. And no, I'm not making that up. McLean had slashed the physical cost of moving freight across oceans by more than 97% overnight. Think about that for a second. A single technological adjustment eliminated centuries of transport friction in a matter of hours. The financial shockwave hit Wall Street immediately. Investment houses realized that legacy breakbulk fleets were holding stranded assets. Chase Manhattan Bank began funding massive capital expenditure programs for container cranes, port terminals, and specialized ships. McLean renamed his enterprise Sealand Service Incorporated. He did not view Sealand as a maritime carrier. He viewed it as a capital-efficient conveyor belt spanning thousands of miles. By drastically reducing dock turnaround times from weeks to hours, Sealand increased the operational asset velocity of its ships by 300%. A single container ship could make 3 times as many ocean crossings per year as a traditional freighter of the same size. This sudden surge in asset productivity meant that shipping lines could amortize their fixed capital costs over vastly larger freight volumes. Transport costs per unit of cargo collapsed toward zero. The barrier to international trade was completely shattered. However, moving to a global network required hundreds of millions of dollars in infrastructure investment. City governments and port authorities were caught entirely unprepared. Traditional ports like the Manhattan Piers or the inner docks of London were physically incapable of handling container traffic. They lacked the vast, flat acreage required to park thousands of 40-foot steel trailers. They lacked deep water channels for heavy steel hulls. Their bridge clearances were too low for giant diesel gantry cranes. Real estate values along historic riverfronts collapsed while low-cost marshlands suddenly became prime logistics real estate. The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey recognized this spatial shift early. They invested heavily in reclaiming swampy marshlands in Elizabeth, New Jersey, building the world's first dedicated container port terminal. Legacy ports that refused to adapt, such as the historic docks of Manhattan and Brooklyn, faced rapid industrial decay and abandonment. As the container revolution expanded, it triggered an explosive, bitter conflict with maritime labor unions. For over a century, dockworkers held enormous geopolitical leverage. A coordinated strike by the International Longshoremen's Association could paralyze a nation's foreign trade within days. Dockworkers earned good wages because their manual labor was indispensable. Containerization threatened to eliminate 9 out of every 10 longshoremen jobs on the waterfront. Union leaders, led by Teddy Gleason on the East Coast and Harry Bridges on the West Coast, declared total war on McLean's steel boxes. Longshoremen refused to unload container ships. They demanded the right to unload every container on the pier manually. Workers wanted to inspect contents and reload the box, a costly process called stripping and stuffing. For nearly a decade, devastating strikes crippled major ports across North America and Europe. The Union War reached a critical turning point in the late 1960s through secret financial compromises. Port authorities and shipowners agreed to establish massive royalty funds and pension guarantees for unionized dockworkers. In exchange for lifetime income guarantees and royalty payments on every ton of containerized freight, the unions dropped their opposition to automated gantry cranes. Follow the money. Shipowners effectively bought out the political and economic power of dock unions through structured royalty payouts. What nobody knew at the time was these financial payouts were cheap compared to the staggering profits unlocked by total automation. A process that once required 100 men working 3 full days was now completed by 5 crane operators in 6 hours. While labor wars raged on the docks, a fierce international battle broke out over structural dimensions. In the early 1960s, every pioneering shipping company was building its own proprietary box size. Sealand used 35-foot containers to match state trucking length limits. Matson Navigation used 24-foot boxes tailored for Hawaiian sugar and pineapple trade. European railroad networks demanded smaller, lighter boxes that could fit through narrow mountain tunnels. This chaotic mix of incompatible container dimensions threatened to destroy the vision of seamless global trade. Railroads could not design standardized flat cars. Crane operators had to constantly change spreader bars. Ship holds required complex, adjustable locking tracks. The international stalemate was broken through rigorous negotiations led by the International Organization for Standardization between 1968 and 1970. The Global Committee established the universal dimensions that rule world trade today: the 20-foot equivalent unit, known as the TU, and the 40-foot container. They standardized the structural strength, stacking tolerances, and corner casting positions for every box built on Earth. Any container produced in Japan could now fit perfectly onto a truck chassis in Ohio, a train flat car in Germany, or a cargo hold in Australia. Yet, despite standard dimensions and growing port terminals, conservative corporate executives in Europe and Asia hesitated to replace their commercial fleets. They needed a massive, real-world stress test to prove that containerization could handle complex, intercontinental supply chains under pressure. That catalyst came from an unexpected, bloody conflict: the Vietnam War. By 1965, the United States military was deploying hundreds of thousands of troops into Southeast Asia, a region with almost zero modern port infrastructure. The military logistics system collapsed into unprecedented chaos. Hundreds of traditional breakbulk supply ships sat anchored off the coast of Da Nang and Saigon for months, waiting to be unloaded by hand. Military supplies rotted in tropical heat or vanished into black markets. Food, ammunition, and medical gear were lost in massive, chaotic open-air dumps. United States Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, a relentless corporate technocrat obsessed with mathematical efficiency, realized the military supply chain was failing. McNamara called Malcolm McLean and awarded Sealand a lucrative, secret government contract to containerize military logistics to Vietnam. McLean built deep-water container terminals at Cam Ranh Bay and Saigon in record time. The results were miraculous. Sealand container ships sailed from West Coast ports in California, unloaded thousands of tons of military hardware in Vietnam in hours, and returned to sea immediately. The U.S. military logistics bottleneck vanished almost overnight. However, this military contract created a profound financial dilemma for McLean. His container ships were making return voyages from Vietnam across the Pacific Ocean completely empty. Sealand was burning fuel carrying thousands of tons of compressed air inside steel boxes back to America. McLean needed outbound cargo from Asia to fill those return voyages and maximize his profit margins. McLean looked across the East China Sea toward post-war Japan. Japanese manufacturing was recovering, producing cheap transistor radios, cameras, and textiles, but Japanese exporters struggled with high shipping costs to Western markets. McLean offered Japanese exporters absurdly low freight rates to fill his empty containers returning to California. Pay attention to this next detail because it explains everything. The Vietnam War unintentionally constructed the physical and financial pipeline for the Asian export boom. Look around this room. Look at the ledger entries sitting on this desk. The mechanics of power never change. Only the tools evolve. You are watching how a simple steel box quietly rewrote global sovereignty. It dismantled Western industrial labor and laid the foundations of modern capital control. If you value deep, uncompromising economic analysis, take 2 seconds right now to hit the subscribe button. Turn on notifications and support this channel. By subscribing, you ensure that these financial investigations continue to bring the hidden history of money to light. Now, let us follow the money back to the Pacific, where the financial dominoes were falling with unstoppable force. The financial success of the Japanese container trade sent shockwaves through global capital markets. Corporate executives in North America and Western Europe suddenly realized a terrifying economic truth. Ocean transport costs had effectively collapsed to near zero. A pair of shoes manufactured in Japan could cross 6,000 miles of ocean for almost nothing. Delivering them to Chicago cost less than trucking shoes from Massachusetts. This mathematical reality destroyed the geographic protection that Western industrial workers enjoyed for over 2 centuries. Factory owners no longer needed to pay high wages to domestic union labor in Detroit, Manchester, or the Ruhr Valley. They moved manufacturing facilities to low-wage nations in East Asia. Goods were produced at a fraction of the cost and shipped to Western consumers inside standardized steel boxes without transport penalties. Capital began flowing out of Western industrial heartlands at an unprecedented pace. Historic manufacturing hubs withered away. The rust belts of North America and Northern Europe emerged quickly. Western workers did not lose their technical skill. The steel box simply made geographic distance financially irrelevant. The docks of London, once the bustling, vibrant heart of the British Empire, closed down completely. Thousands of historic warehouses were abandoned or demolished, replaced decades later by luxury real estate developments and financial trading desks. In East Asia, the economic impact was breathtaking. Nations that adopted containerization early experienced explosive, unprecedented industrial growth. Taiwan, South Korea, Hong Kong, and Singapore built massive automated container terminals, transforming themselves into global export powerhouses within a single generation. These Asian tigers plugged their industrial policies directly into the containerized supply lines of Western retail giants. By the late 1970s and 1980s, corporate logistics evolved from simple point-to-point shipping into hyper-complex, globalized supply chain management. Corporations no longer manufactured entire products under one roof. They fragmented production across multiple continents. An electronic device might start with raw materials mined in Africa. Microchips were fabricated in Taiwan, casings molded in Malaysia, and final assembly finished in China. Standardized steel boxes moved components seamlessly between every step. This globalized division of labor gave birth to just-in-time manufacturing. Pioneered by Toyota, this model was quickly adopted by tech giants like Apple and retail juggernauts like Walmart. Companies realized they no longer needed to maintain expensive, localized warehouses full of buffer inventory. Instead, they transformed global shipping lanes into moving, floating warehouses. Goods were scheduled to arrive at factory gates exactly at the hour they were needed on the assembly line. And no, I'm not making that up. Major corporations saved billions of dollars in real estate and storage costs by using container ships as their primary warehouse space. Think about that for a second. The entire modern retail economy operates without a financial safety net, relying completely on uninterrupted maritime logistics. In 1979, the container revolution reached its ultimate geopolitical culmination when mainland China opened its economy to foreign investment under Deng Xiaoping. Chinese state planners recognized that containerization was their golden ticket to global market dominance. The Chinese government invested trillions of yuan building the most sophisticated, massive container ports on Earth, including Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Ningbo Zhoushan. When China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, the container infrastructure was already fully mature and waiting. The floodgates of global manufacturing opened completely. Millions of American and European industrial jobs migrated to Chinese coastal economic zones almost overnight. The container box became the fundamental physical engine driving the massive trade surpluses of East Asia and the staggering structural trade deficits of the United States. To maximize profit margins, maritime shipping companies entered an aggressive arms race to build increasingly monstrous container ships. In the 1950s, McLean's Ideal X carried 58 containers. By the 1990s, ships carried 4,000 boxes. By the 2020s, megavessels like the Ever Given were engineered to carry over 24,000 TEUs. They stack boxes 20 stories high above the waterline. These floating steel skyscrapers are so immense that their length exceeds the height of the Empire State Building. However, this relentless pursuit of maximum scale created extreme financial and geopolitical fragility. The global monetary system became hopelessly reliant on a fragile, hyper-optimized maritime architecture operating with zero redundancy. The margins of error vanished. Here's the thing most people don't realize. 90% of all tangible physical goods on planet Earth travel inside a container at least once in their life cycle. Pay attention to this next detail because it explains everything. The entire globalized financial order rests on a razor-thin maritime network vulnerable to physical blockades, geopolitical conflicts, and systemic shocks. This vulnerability became glaringly apparent to the world in March 2021, when a single mega-container ship, the Ever Given, ran aground in the Suez Canal. For 6 days, the vessel jammed itself sideways across the narrow waterway, blocking hundreds of container ships carrying tens of billions of dollars in freight. Global trade stalled at a cost of nearly $400 million per hour. Supply chains panicked, triggering severe inventory shortages, factory shutdowns, and massive inflationary spikes across Western economies. By 2026, containerization has transformed from a commercial efficiency tool into a high-stakes arena of global geopolitical warfare. Control over maritime infrastructure is now recognized as a core instrument of sovereign power. State-owned enterprises, most notably China's COSCO Shipping, have systematically purchased controlling equity stakes in strategic port terminals worldwide. They now control critical hubs like Piraeus in Greece, Rotterdam in the Netherlands, and Hamburg in Germany. Through its Belt and Road Initiative, Beijing used container port financing to establish critical logistics footholds. These strategic positions span ocean trade corridors across Asia, Africa, South America, and Europe. Control over these automated terminals grants unprecedented economic leverage. In times of international tension, a state controlling port software can quietly throttle container processing speeds. This creates immediate economic paralysis inside targeted rival nations. Furthermore, Western nations have suddenly realized the geopolitical danger of total supply chain dependency. The concentration of container manufacturing itself represents a shocking monopoly. Today, over 90% of all intermodal shipping containers worldwide are manufactured by just 3 state-supported Chinese state enterprises. If a global conflict erupts, the supply of physical containers carrying world trade can be restricted at the source. The monetary consequences of this structural dependency are reaching a tipping point. As Western governments attempt to reshore critical industries, build regional supply chains, and reduce foreign economic reliance, they are confronting a painful mathematical truth. Rebuilding domestic manufacturing infrastructure requires immense capital expenditure, and operating those factories without cheap container logistics drives consumer prices sharply higher. The era of ultra-cheap, container-driven deflation is giving way to a new era of structural inflation and fragmented regional trade blocs. The simple steel box designed by Malcolm McLean in 1956 succeeded far beyond its creator's wild dreams. It eliminated distance, broke union power, unleashed modern corporate financialization, and lifted billions of people out of absolute poverty across Asia. But in doing so, it bound the nations of the world together in a fragile, hyper-dependent economic pact from which there is no easy escape. We return to 1956, where $5.83 per ton became 15 cents. Financial mechanisms evolve, but power structures endure. Leave a $sign in the comments below to prove you made it. Subscribe now, and click the next video to uncover the hidden truth.